Hey mates, this is Fishing Rod from Melbourne, Florida that is. Not Melbourne, Australia, but there is a lot of similarities. We still got the giant insects, the big huge mosquitoes, we've got the snakes, we've got the spiders, we got the hogs, and we got the huge alligators. So I like to think of the swamps out here, in the wetlands out here in Melbourne, Florida, as the redneck down under. So let me just kind of change hats right here, and then I'll put on my Melbourne, Florida redneck down under hat. What I'm doing today is I'm going to give you a PK for Robert Milner from Beaver Dam Mud Runners. And this PK is basically going to be to help you assemble the Longtail way quicker, because I found out as I read through all the directions and trying to do everything right, and the fact that I'm a hands-on kind of guy, that it would just be a better way just to simply show you how to do it hands-on, and then you can just follow along and assemble yours and get it done in a way quicker time. And because you're not having to read through all the directions, I mean, you can summarize through the directions, have a general idea. That's always a good idea. Robert's even got some safety stuff up front on his directions that you definitely want to take time to read through. Now, I've never really met Robert, but I feel like I've known him because I've studied his PK's product knowledge that he does about his longtails, kind of a basic assembly of how everything goes together, but not really like a really hands-on. So I'm going to do a hands-on on the throttle, installing the cable, as well as doing the kill switch, and as well as how to install the shaft itself and the propeller, as well. I end up pretty much doing for you, so you have a better understanding of how everything fits together and save you a lot of time allowing you to get out on the water. I feel like I know Robert. I've had some great conversations with him on the phone. I've called one time when his dad trains dogs, and they had a special friend from guests from England come over, and Robert's dad was and this special guest was teaching how to train your dog for different things like hunting and different things. So Robert was coming back from that, and I was on the phone with him and got to exchange some pretty cool stories. But how it all started out is I had a Honda GX390 that I got for a really good deal. Excuse me, a guy that I worked with, he had this engine. He was going to be a pressure washer and then work part-time with us as well, with my company, and he ended up frying the pump on the engine. It didn't hurt the engine, but he did fry the pump, and what they wanted to fix it, because he had made a mistake on it, he ended up costing so much money that he was just disgusted with the whole thing and wanted nothing else to do with it. So he ended up selling me the engine for $50. I was like, $50? This is a deal, and I ended up with this probably $650 engine. And I was going to actually rebuild it myself into a pump, put the pump back on, and sell it as a pressure washer. But I was hanging on to it, and meanwhile, years ago, when I lived in Kansas, I was fishing in a lake, and a pretty small lake that a friend of mine owned. He had given me permission to fish out there, and I was out there fishing several times, catching some really nice largemouth bass out there, believe it or not, in Kansas. And one day I looked down right where I'd been fishing the whole time, and actually saw like the front end of this boat down there. So I went back and I asked him about it that evening. He says, "Oh yeah, that's an old aluminum boat that that's submerged down there." He says, "There's nothing really wrong with it. Some kids were out there playing and sunk it, and I never bothered to get it out because I've got some other boats, and it's there." And I was like, "Well, would you be interested in selling it?" He said, "Yeah, I'll sell it to you for $50 if you can get it out." So we pulled the truck down and hooked up it. It was just right out, about 4 or 5 feet out. It was just so full of moss you couldn't really tell it was there. And so I slid it out and then bailed some water and slid it out until I had it all the way out. And now I have this green moss-ridden boat. So we put it on a flatbed, took it back home. I've been pressure washing for years. I sprayed the whole thing down with bleach in it, ate it up within 4 or 5 minutes, pressure washed it really good to make sure all the chlorine was off the aluminum. And I had this pretty nice looking boat with no damage to it. So I got to investigate it and found out that this was a vintage boat made back in the 1950s after the World War. They had all these factories to build planes with the great big heavy duty pop rivets and built out of aluminum, and so different entrepreneurs come in, were buying it and doing different things with them with the factories, and some of them were making different boats out of them. And I got lucky enough, I ended up with a vintage boat. From what I've seen on the internet, it looks like about a 1956-57 Trailblaze is the closest I've seen to it, but I'm not really sure. I've never got it identified. But just the reason why I'm explaining this to you is because I ended up bringing the boat. I left Kansas, and my dad passed away a couple years later, so I went back to help my mom, and I decided I'd take my truck down, my Toyota, and pick it up because it's such a light little boat. I got down there, and I actually had a trailer for it, because after I had the boat brought in and cleaned it all up, a friend of mine, Jimmy Ray, in Lorain, Kansas is where we were. Jimmy Ray comes up, "Hey, would you like to buy a trailer for that? I got the perfect trailer for that boat." And I'm like, "Sure, how much?" He's like, $50. So all right, sounds like a winner. I got the Honda GX390 for $50, and I got the boat for $50. Now I got a trailer for $50. So I bought it, and then, like I said, I left it all in Kansas, but my dad passed away, so I drove back out with my Toyota, and I picked it all up after I helped my mom, and I was getting ready to leave Kansas. And the day before I left, Jimmy Ray come up to me and said, "Hey Rod, how would you like an engine for that boat?" And I'm like, "An engine? How much?" And he says, "Well, I got the engine, and I'll show you a couple windshields. I've got the steering wheel, steering cables, and the shifting cables for it. I'll sell it all to you for $50. So I'm like, "All right, I'll buy it." So I bought it. And I realize that the 40 may be a little heavy for it, but also they make different things right now, like a West system that they use for building lightweight racing boats. They're huge boats, but they're really built lightweight, and I could actually build some pontoons off of it, and the pontoons would actually strengthen up the weight of the 40 horse, and I would have my steering and everything. So I brought it back here to Florida, and realizing that in the intercoastal, this boat, you have big waves and thunder and everything come up, and I need a boat that would be able to plow through waves and get me back to shore. So I started beefing the boat up. I realized it had a little 1/4-inch transom in the middle of it that were really well built and very strong, but they were also a trip hazard. So I decided I was going to put a floor in it. So I went to a friend of mine that has a screen, sells actually installed screen enclosures, and he has some old pieces of the actual tubing, square tubing. So he gave them to me. And I brought them back, and I cut them to the same shape as the stringers, put liquid nails on, run bolts all the way through both tubes and through the stringer. And now I had a really beefed up stringer that I could actually lay an aluminum platform on. So then I put an aluminum platform on the whole bottom of the boat. Now I can walk around on a flat boat. And then next thing I did is I bought a special foam, and I made a vent hole to pour it in and a vent hole to exit out. And I started pulling each of the different sections till the whole floor was filled with the foam. And then I ended up doing a lot of other things, beefing up the transom and everything. By the time I was done, this boat weighed about 500 pounds. So I knew that I'd end up probably eventually have to put the pontoons on or get like a 25 horse for it, which didn't matter because I still had all the shifting and steering and everything that I needed installed on the boat and ready to go. Well, then one day I was kind of looking around on the internet, checking out the different engines, trying to learn a little bit about the 390. If I wanted to soup it up, I was thinking about putting on a goat cart, and I stumbled into the Taiwan Longtails, and then eventually I stumbled into Beaver Dam Longtails, and I started checking out, and I saw this PK, product knowledge, that Robert Milner did about the basics of putting this mud runner together, and I looked like it was really solid and everything, so I give him a call and started talking to him about it, and getting to know him and everything, like I said, and found out he was as excited about me getting my boat with his engine on the water, well, with his system on the water. He's as excited as I was, so it's really great that, you two guys get together on the phone and, you share the same excitement about being out on the water and fishing and hunting and everything. So we started exchanging stories, but like I said, I ended up purchasing one from him. But in the conversation, he had mentioned to me, "Well, how much does your boat weigh now that you beefed it up?" And I told him, probably about 500 or 600 pounds. And then with me and my gear or another guy fishing, you're talking 1,000 pounds. He says, "Well, that's pretty heavy for the direct drive." He says, "If you're interested in experimenting for me, I will give you a deal on one of my gear reductions that I had." And I said, "Well, gear reduction, what's that?" And he has a gear reduction that's basically kind of off of a regular Honda motorcycle that's been kind of re-engineered to fit onto the GX390. He's got two of them. One, I believe, is a 2,800 pound thrust that I got, and the other one's like a 38 pound thrust, or 2,500 and 3,500 pound thrust. And he started explaining to me that he sold one to a guy up in Alaska, and I'm the only one in the lower 48 states that has one of these, so I'm going to be experiment for him. But the guy up in Alaska, he actually hooked it up to boats, to aluminum boats or John boats or lighter boats. He hooked it up to get up to headwaters with his customers for hunting. And he found out that worked really good to get the weight of him and his customer and the hunting gear up to headwaters to go moose hunting. And that's what I like to do. I like to go up to headwaters here in Florida, because if I shoot a big hog and then I load it on, or a deer, I load on the boat, now I'm just floating down the stream and I'm using the engine to navigate to get me back to camp. If I have any engine problems, I'm going to end up downstream where I belong anyway, and I can get some help. So I always go upstream hunting as well. So he started explaining all this to me, and so I told him I would do some experiments for him. So that's why I wanted to mention that to you. I'm going to be experimenting with the direct drive, knowing that's a little heavy. I still want to see if it's going to work for my boat, because I'm not out there trying to win races, and climb telephone poles and jump ski ramps. I'm out there just to go fishing in small lakes and intercoastal areas where I don't have to go 20 miles to go fishing. I know some good spots. So basically, I just want to be able to get out there and do some fishing. But also, I want to use the gear reduction, because that's more like a little tugboat, and I can plow through waves if the weather comes up. So I'm going to check the speed and distance on the direct drive, check the speed and distance on the gear ratio, and find out how similar they are, and do some experimentation for Robert and for myself to help him out to understand a little bit better how it works, whether or not it's governing the engine and causing it just to stay at tugboat rate, or if it's going to run a little bit faster, normal speed. So we want to learn about this stuff. So it's going to be really fun. But the first thing, like I said, I want to teach you about is the throttle install. In the throttle install, when I was installing the throttle, it's got like a motorcycle handle on it, and it's nice and smooth if you do it right. And what I did is I tried to go inside the pipe, because there's an entrance hole to go inside the pipe, but it kinked it a little bit there. And then by the time I come out the back side of the pipe that's hollow and come around to the front of the motor, it put like another little bend in it, and I just wasn't getting a real smooth reaction out of the throttle. So what I ended up doing is going external on the throttle, which Robert suggested, and you put zip ties on it and kept it really close and snug, because you're going to be going around tree branches and stuff. And then I hooked it up to the throttle, and I found out that it was way smoother. I also learned that you need a little bit stronger spring for the return spring. I'll show you how I hooked that up, and I'll show you how to loosen the bolt on top of the throttle, where you have to hand pull the throttle. You loosen that up a little bit, so now that the motorcycle handle will be able to turn the throttle instead. Also, I made a little prototype here. This is like a copy of the actual top of the engine with the throttle cable. This is a mock-up of the throttle cable and the interior wire. The actual thing that comes with the Honda engines to lock down the throttle cable. And then Robert sends this little thing that the actual cable, internal cable, fishes through this, and then it gets tightened down. And once it's tightened down, it allows you, as you pull, to allow the mechanism, the throttle, for the gas to turn. So I'll show you how to do all that, and I'll show you how to do the kill switch. Excuse me, the kill switch as well, and show you how to install the shaft and all the mechanisms, the cone where you put the grease in, which is 1/3 grease, the 50 to 65 pound torque. I'll show all that to you, and if you're following along with your engine, you would really be able to put this together, this whole engine together, in probably an hour and a half or less, because you're going to feel confident, because I'm showing you how to do it. You're not thumbing through all the directions like I had to do, and you're not trying to do everything with one hand like I had to do, because now I got some ways, with the simple sponge, and a small sponge, or a little Smurf ball, or some surgical cord, and some tape, I can show you how to put this engine together, the throttle, really easy. But the first thing I want to do is teach you how to do the kill switch.